For Global Business Update, Michael Wilson, our journalist from London. Great to have you, Michael. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning. Yes. Now, Wall Street was slightly optimistic yesterday because a lot of the banks, as I was telling you, at least talking with Reuters yesterday, passed their stress tests, and this sort of moved into Asia Pacific. But Japanese stocks really the standout. They fell very slightly. The consumer price index, as far as Japan is concerned, came out much higher than expected. Their target's still that 2% really, which is the central bank, but the Nikkei down 0.5% as a result of that. Investors have been looking at China once again. There is a thing called the Beige Book. Now, the Beige Book is something which, if you pay attention to what's happening in the United States market, you'll be familiar with that. It's a sort of business confidence thing. It also is published, it's researched in the United States, but it's also referring to China. And it's saying that as far as they're concerned, the stimulus from the central bank is not working as fast as the authorities there would like. However, the Beige Book did expect growth to be increasing in the quarter, which is just coming to an end, the second quarter coming to an end today. But they still think a big rebound is due to come in the Chinese economy, but not yet. As far as the United States is concerned, futures, little change. Basically, they're waiting for something which the Fed always looks at in terms of inflation, and this is personal consumption figures. They're out later today. Its effect, and also yesterday, we noted that the U.S. economy has grown slightly faster in the first quarter than it was thought to have done. These are revised figures, but it shows that the economy there grew by 2%. So that economy is refusing to lie down. Where this leaves the Fed, of course, we'll see about that in the next few days. Google is blocking its news service in Canada. Now, this is something which is happening internationally. Google's also suffered in the same, or rather Alphabet has, from authorities in Australia, the news operations there. Similarly in Canada, they're saying you may not publish our news free. Some agreement was reached in Australia between Alibaba and, between Meta and Google, and that's expected that probably will happen in Canada. But again, for the moment, no news on those. Sweden yesterday, we saw an interest rate rise from the bank there, and it's not affected, though, the krona, which has continued to fall. The suspicion is that economists are looking at that, and they're not very convinced about the strength of Sweden's economy, which is rather odd, but that they did raise interest rates yesterday. It had no effect on the krona. Pakistan, that apparently they've been talking to the IMF about their $3 billion loan. It appears as though some sort of agreement has been reached, but the new prime minister there, Shehbaz Sharif, has actually increased taxes, which is part of the IMF's demands in Pakistan. Again, that's work in progress. They're so far they're after a loan of $3.5 billion, and so far apparently they've reached agreement, at least in basic terms, with the IMF. ECB hawks. Now, the central bankers are meeting in Portugal this week. They've been drawing a certain amount of comfort from the Bank of England, actually, of all places. Bank of England, as you know, this big surprise interest rate rise, and the governor of the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey, is saying that he replied to his critics and said, I have to do this to get inflation down. And it's sort of given a bit of oxygen to hawks as far as the ECB is concerned. So they're actually looking at the Bank of England thinking we ought to be doing something rather similar. In the UK, the housing market is such, and the cost of living is such that people have been withdrawing cash, withdrawing a record amount. In fact, the biggest amount in a month since records began in 1997. Remember, inflation here, 8.7% still, and the Bank of England threatening to raise interest rates even further. I'm going to take you just briefly to Virgin Galactic, which is celebrating this morning Sir Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic, its first commercial flight. What was happening there was that some Italian, so this is the first paid for, this is what I mean by commercial, the first paid for flight took 3 Italian scientists into weightlessness, some 85 kilometers above the Earth's surface, and they carried out experiments in weightlessness there. But this is the first commercial flight. Obviously, Jeff Bezos and his Blue Origin beat Branson to that, but then as Virgin Galactic are sort of celebrating this. Oil and gas, again, a big conference taking place in Asia. In Kuala Lumpur, and there Big Oil has been saying that big oil and big gas will continue to provide energy to the world for the next decade or two, and that they're feeling the energy transition will take much longer than people actually had hoped for. And as far as gold, well, that came down again yesterday. It broke through that $1,900 barrier. That's because the traders suspect that the next move in interest rates will happen in July in the United States and will be up. That will make the dollar higher. That will put more pressure on gold. That is the global view as we get to the end of the second quarter of the year.
That's amazing. And yay. We just can wish the world economy well as we get to the end of the second quarter. I'd like to go and talk a little bit about the tech companies. With the humongous amount of money, why is it so difficult for them to be able to pay publishers of news? They make so much money. They're nations on their own. Look at companies like Apple. So much cash in the bank. So much cash. But why can't they pay publishers for their creativity if there is a creator economy that they started already? Take, for instance, with YouTube and with other platforms, that creator economy is worth about $700 billion. Why can't they pay us, the traditional publishers?
Well, I think the answer to your question is they can, and certainly they both Meta and Alibaba have come to. Meta and Alphabet have come to a sort of agreement in Australia. I suspect the same will happen in Canada as well. I mean, as I've often said before when we talked about this, I think that there is part of those organizations that say, look, we're giving your news organization a tremendous distribution opportunity, because our members want it and so on. But the news organization is saying, actually, gathering news is quite expensive. So I suspect that some sort of agreement will be reached. You're absolutely right. I mean, they do have the money to do it. Why on earth would they not? Because news is a commodity, and you have to pay for it.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess because this is a news channel, that was also my focus this morning with regards to what's going on in Canada. And perhaps another angle to that would be that if a deal is reached, like you've mentioned in other countries, will this then be the future of accessing news on different platforms? And do you think that these tech companies could possibly propose a subscription service for any of their users who would like to access news on their platforms to recoup the money and then be able to pay these, pay traditional publishers for their news being published on their platforms, as it's done with music?
I think they can afford to pay right now. I suspect that subscription may well be the answer. It'd be difficult though. I mean, news organisations do find it difficult to put things behind paywalls, don't they? This is part of the big debate. What should be free and what should be paid for. It happens throughout media organisations throughout the world. The basic thing is, and I keep saying this, is that gathering proper news in an original way is expensive, and I mean you just have to cope with that. And if an agreement will be reached, I suspect it probably will be reached in the same way that it was reached in Australia. But this is going to be an ongoing debate between social media and news organisations like Arise, for example.
Well, Michael, two things quickly. I saw a report blaming persons in the UK depleting their savings, over 4 billion withdrawals in May alone. And the argument that some people are putting up is that this is due to poor investment. That if you had invested in bonds or UK gilt, you will have made more money. Should we be blaming ordinary people for saving in the banks and telling them they should have made different options when there are more, serious fundamentals with how the economy is panning out, either in the UK or elsewhere? And then the second issue, at the Energy Asian Conference in Kuala Lumpur, all the big, multinationals, oil and gas multinationals are saying, forget it, oil is not going anywhere. That in fact, demand is going to go up and reach a peak by 2045. So what does that mean with regard to the net zero expectations in many of the countries?
I think you're absolutely right to focus on that. I mean, you would expect big oil and gas to say exactly what they've said, wouldn't you? I mean, that seems to be the way forward. Of course, they would say that. I think what they're beginning to say, and I'm sure that a lot of people would agree with that. Those targets which are agreed by politicians because they have a nice feel to them are probably that mixture which we seem to be talking about every day between reality and what people actually hope for, aspirations. I feel as though that the transition is going to take a lot longer. I just feel as though it will, because we're so. I mean, you see it now with electric vehicles. I don't know what the take-up's like in your country, but here, I mean, there are ads constantly about electric vehicles. But the fact of the matter is that the infrastructure for charging them varies right throughout the country, and more people are saying, I've got to go up. And we're only talking about 200-mile journeys, but I mean, people are saying, I can't take that 200-mile journey in my car. So this is the practical way in which these kind of transitions are not actually taking place. As far as withdrawals concerned, yes, it's a lot of money. People appear to be withdrawing money to pay bills, and secondly, to put their money into savings account where they do sort of attract slightly higher interest rates. But as you know, there's a big debate going on right now about whether how quickly the banks are actually passing on those kind of things. And you're almost bringing me to one of my favorite topics, which is about education. If more people were educated in financial matters, they probably would be investing that money sensibly. You're right to bring attention to UK gilts and bonds and so on, corporate bonds. It's something which is seen as a relatively safe investment. I couldn't possibly comment because I don't offer financial advice, but I feel as though an education would be a good idea.
Well, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you very much indeed. Now, Rotus Odiri is here. Let's go to Rotus Odiri.
Yeah.
Good morning, Rotus.
Good morning, everybody. Which is interesting that you mentioned defense, because Bank of America mentioned defense in their reports on Nigeria. It actually came out yesterday. I didn't get a chance to get to this yesterday, but they said Nigeria viewpoint, finally a structural reform story, more upside. We quickly run through this. So what they said in their reports, we look at some of their quotes from Nigeria, basically talking about reform. But defense did come up in terms of trying to talk about oil theft. All right, riding the wave of support, basically saying Tinubu's delivering, these reforms with no social protests yet. Saying with current momentum, this is where the defense comes in, since we're talking about General Irabo pulling out and Mr. Yahaya and so on. No, let's go back to the first one. They said in the first quote, they said the next big move for the president should be to reduce oil theft by reforming the security sector and involving host communities near the pipelines. If successful, this could increase crude production to 1.6 million barrels per day in 12 to 18 months from its current 1.2 million barrels per day, barring OPEC limits. Positive oil prospects plus Dangote refinery coming online represents a potential structural improvement in Nigeria's outlook. Then Nigeria depending on hydrocarbons. And so the defense, when we look at the General Irabo being, pulling out and everything, remember he was part of that movement that went to the Niger Delta and the operation this and that to end oil theft. So I guess all of that has to be looked at when we look back on his tenure. Still on Bank of America, they talked about the outlook on the Naira, saying right now it's probably undervalued. Naira is now undervalued post-float, saying that higher oil exports and a liberalized import regime can still result in consistent current account surplus. That's the difference between your what's going out and what's coming into your account. So they're saying that they're seeing a fair value of 680 to the dollar. However, they say it's likely to trade above this level, which we've seen is at 700 levels right now, but they see it returning to 650 to 680 in 2024. So yeah, that's what Bank of America is looking at as far as the Naira is concerned. There's well, we get to, I think there's an illustration in today's business day, which I thought was very interesting, which is a really strong metaphor. You've got the Naira as a paper boat, which is floating on water, and President Tinubu pushing it, and then you've seen when your ship is at sea, you've got stormy clouds, you've got capital flows, corruption, interest rates, inflation, and all these things that are going to be, pushing against the momentum of the Naira as it moves through. So I thought it was a very interesting metaphor there. Fuel stations, some reports that oil marketers are saying that we could see 700 Naira per litre fuel in July as they go to import new stock. So again, the exchange rate is part of that conversation, because if you are giving out licenses to different oil marketers in the downstream sector to go and import fuel into the country, if they are accessing FX at the I&E window or parallel market, those 700 Naira levels versus the 400 Naira levels that the NNPC was using to bring in fuel prior to the exchange rate liberalization will result, in theoretically possibly higher fuel. At which point somebody sent me a WhatsApp message saying that they are looking at electric bikes. Funny enough, there's a store in VI that sells them. Can you believe that? I didn't know that. I didn't know that. There's a store. So you can find everything in Lagos. So I'm going to check them out this weekend, and maybe I will stop driving, because I don't know what I would do with fuel at 700 Naira levels.
Wow,
I'll
you're feeling the impact.
I'm going to just walk.
You feel it?
I'll feel it, but I'm still in favor of the policy being removed.
You have a choice. You live close to work.
No, well, I do, but then I was invited somewhere on the mainland. I turned it down. I said, you have to come pick me up because I'm not driving. I'm sorry. Valentine's Day next year is going to be tight. Real tight, man. Real tight. Wait, let's finish up. I think, are we going to? No, Germany. Okay, look, palliatives. This is very interesting. Let me talk to you about Germany, since we're about to talk about palliatives. German inflation increased in June. It accelerated. May was 6.3%, June it was 6.8%. Do you know why? Germany partially removed transportation subsidies from last year. You know that Europe has been going through oil price shocks with the war in Ukraine. So Germany has been hit particularly hard, and it's the biggest economy in the EU. So they introduced, and I know Nigeria is not Germany, German engineering, German excellence. They have a solid transportation system. They've got cards that you use to pay for your transportation, so they can track how many people are using public transportation. But they introduced the subsidies last year. And that is August of last year. We are just about July of this year now. So that's 11 months. They are already partially removing it. So this is the conversation we had. And yesterday, unfortunately, Rufai, you weren't here, with Paul Alaji and Professor Waleke, the two economists that we talked to. Paul Alaji said he's not in favor of palliatives. They've never worked. But the issue is,
no, I have an argument with Paul.
Hold on.
Okay,
so the thing is, they introduced it last year, and with less than a year to go, Germany is already removing the subsidies they put on transportation. So they can't last forever, and there has to be an off-ramp to take it off. Very quickly, it's Friday. Netflix has introduced a new cartoon called Team Super 4. It's Super Team 4. It's about 4 teenage girls who are superheroes in Lusaka, Zambia. Essentially, if we look at a quick reports from Netflix, remember this report we talked about in April about their socio-economic impact, where they talked about the number of jobs that they've created. With every new project, this is their first animated series coming out of Africa. So they are hiring voiceover actors, they are hiring engineers, they are hiring VFX artists, they are hiring studios to produce these things. If this does well, it comes out in July, or later on this month. Hopefully we see more. So it ties into the job creation of the continent.
I know there's no room for comment, but I just want to say I tackle the position by Paul Alaje that subsidies don't work in bigger countries. He should go and read the case study of Bolsa Familia, Brazil. targeted subsidies do work. Conditional cash transfer work because they were targeted outcomes. Most of the children that benefited from Bolsa Familia, that they went to school, studied engineering, maths, education, medicine, those were the people that came to vote for Lula in the last election. But it does work. It has to be targeted.
All right.
Well,
We have to go.
thank you.
Thank you so much.
The Bank of America report that you brought,
Yeah.
you missed out the line there about words of caution, warning against complacency,
Right.
warning against losing momentum. You know, a message of hope about the reforms going on in Nigeria, but there are also cautionary words
Oh, yes.
in that particular report.
Indeed, indeed. Thank you so much.